Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. Welcome. My name's Tim Diet. I'm the Provost and Dean of the Faculty here at Hampden-Sydney College. Tonight's talk, we're all here to hear Dr. Hansen, but I do want to mention how tonight is one example of the opportunities that our community enjoy that are made possible due to the generosity of benefactors. And tonight we're particularly honored to have Dr. and Mrs. Canada join us. They created the professorship that Dr. Scott Starr, as the Hansen professor, note that it's not random there, that Scott Starr now holds, and his position was created to really bring and nurture environmental studies and environmental science here at Hampden-Sydney College, and that's really again due to the generosity of folks who care deeply about this place. In addition, they also care deeply about students and created a scholarship for students, again in honoring chemistry professor Ty Miller. And so again, the connections that form between students and students, alumni, and faculty, and how faculty choose to give back. We're very honored to be in this place, and thank you, Dr. and Mrs. Canada. It is my honor to welcome Dr. James Hansen to Hampden-Sydney. As you hopefully know, Dr. Hansen is one of the world's most influential climate scientists. If you don't believe it, ChatGPT also confirmed this. But he's well known for his groundbreaking research and for his decades of public service. He served as director of the Goddard Institute for Space Studies for more than 30 years. In the 1980s, he testified before the United States Congress, sounding one of the earliest and clearest alarms about the dangers of climate change. It's a discussion that's really shaped the global conversation we're still having today. Since 2013, he served as the director of the program on climate science awareness and solutions at Columbia University. He's the author of influential books, including Storms of My Grandchildren, and it's important to note that he has generously taken a break from finishing his next book, Sophie's Planet, a search for truth about our remarkable home planet and its future, in order to be with us today. He's a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences and has received numerous awards, including the Sophie and Blue Planet Prizes. Dr. Hansen is recognized for speaking truth to power and for outlining actions needed to protect the future of young people and all species on the planet. This evening, he'll continue that mission by addressing a question that goes to the heart of both science and society with a talk titled, Can Young People Shape Their Future? Discussion of Real-World Evidence. Please join me in welcoming Dr. James Hansen.
Thanks very much. I always feel uncomfortable with the introductions because we haven't really accomplished our mission with regard to addressing climate change. And we researchers in the field bear responsibility for part of the responsibility for failure to do the things that are needed. So I have to be very blunt. I'm an 84-year-old man who thinks he knows something important about climate change and the effect that it's having on today's young people and their children. And I must start with 3 confessions. The first confession, I have done a darn poor job of communicating what I know about the climate story. In the early years, I had an excuse. My wife, Anique, who knows me best, we've been married 55 years, stresses that I suffered from Asperger's syndrome, which affects oral communication. But I've had plenty of time to overcome that. So it's not a valid excuse. And the second confession, and this is a crucial one, young people today are stuck with the burden of fixing the climate problem, even though they did not cause it. It's very unfair, but that's the way it is. The people who caused the problem, including my generation, clearly are not going to fix it, as I will explain. The third confession is an apology for my slowness in describing the situation that we are in. A decade ago, I knew that I had useful insights about climate change and started to write a book, Sophie's Planet. Sophie is my oldest grandchild. And I completed drafts of 47 chapters. But then, about 4 years ago, I realized that at long last we had data to address the most important climate science issue. And it then took a few years to write a couple of long papers, and it changed things, as I will explain. Now, one last introductory comment and acknowledgement. The reason I could spend so much time working on the climate problem is that Anik shouldered most of the time-consuming aspect of parenting and grandparenting. And at the same time, she did a great job of improving the apartments and the houses that we lived in over those decades, and so that we could have a good family life. Now, she has become skeptical about whether I will finish Sophie's Planet, but I actually will do it in the next several months. And I think that the next 5 to 10 years are the crucial period for changing the direction of where the planet is headed. And I have some relevant information, so let's talk about that. So can young people shape the future? Well, I will argue that they have the potential to do that. And they should feel energized to do that. Potential, but success requires understanding of the basic issues and understanding of what action would be effective. I will argue that the knowledge required is simple and fundamental. Understanding of the underlying problem in today's politics. Understanding of how climate change relates to energy sources, and understanding of yourself and your potential to affect politics. Some background information. I grew up in a small town in western Iowa, the deepest red conservative part of the state. And I was educated at the University of Iowa, which is in the deepest blue, liberal county in the state, the one that's just south of Cedar Rapids, Iowa City. People in Iowa, as I believe in other states, are honest and open-minded. For example, in 2008, Barack Obama won Iowa in a landslide, 55 to 45%. He even won Crawford County in the deep red part of the state, the county that I grew up in. But Obama lost Iowa in 2012. Most voters are thinking people. They are not deplorables. Now, I'm a political independent. I think that is useful for a scientist, because in science you must be objective, willing to change your conclusion as new data become available. Being an independent makes it easier to avoid any tendency for a preferred answer, easier to avoid any tendency to be swayed by ideology. The first president I remember was Harry Truman. Truman was an excellent president, in my opinion. The U.S. provided global leadership in the formation of the United Nations, the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and global economic cooperation. It was not a zero-sum game. Global cooperation lifted all boats, especially the United States. Eisenhower was a capable president. He supported education, established a science advisory committee, and listened to advice. On his deathbed, he said, this bunch of scientists was one of the few groups that I encountered in Washington who seemed to be there to help the country, not to help themselves. In his farewell address, he warned the public of the dangers of the military-industrial complex. But he omitted the main issue. His brother, Dr. Milton Eisenhower, president of Johns Hopkins University, who had helped draft the speech, was surprised. And he asked, why did you leave out Congress? And Ike said it was more than enough to take on military and private industry. But Congress controls the purse strings, and Congress people are allowed to accept money from private industry. This is legalized bribery. Since then, the role of special interests in controlling our government has grown enormously, with monstrous consequences. Let's look first at the military-industrial case, and then turn to the impact of special interests on climate change. John Kennedy, during the campaign in 1960, introduced the Peace Corps concept, and he gave it high priority. His City on a Hill speech was not about American exceptionalism. Instead, it followed the meaning of the original City on a Hill speech. John Winthrop's sermon in 1630 to the Pilgrims before they embarked from Europe to establish the first successful colony in the United States. His message was simply that the eyes of all people would be upon them. Kennedy learned about the deep state in the CIA's Bay of Pigs fiasco in Cuba, and he accepted responsibility for that. Kennedy's peace speech was probably his greatest speech. Khrushchev described it as the best speech he had ever read. And it led to the partial test ban treaty. And they had plans for additional meetings for further de-escalation. Kennedy also gave instructions to the military, a timetable to withdraw from Vietnam. But a few weeks later, he was assassinated. Perhaps we would have gone down a different path if he had been president for 8 years instead of 2 years and 10 months. However, Vice President Johnson became president, and he chose to continue and increase American military involvement. In 1964, with the help of faulty intelligence from the U.S. Defense Department about incidents in the Gulf of Tonkin, Congress gave President Johnson legal justification to initiate open warfare against North Vietnam. Analogous to the faulty intelligence about weapons of mass destruction that gave President Bush an excuse to launch the Iraq War. 4 years later, in 1968, we were still fighting the Vietnam War. And young people had an impact. They played a large role in protests that led President Johnson not to seek re-election in 1968. However, the protests did not address the fundamental problem: the role of the military-industrial congressional complex. Does this have anything to do with climate change? Yes, the same root cause and potential solution. In the case of climate change, protests are not enough to achieve effective actions. We can elect a president and lawmakers who say who say that they will address climate. And we have done that. But that doesn't mean anything if they do not address the underlying fundamental problem. It seemed in the late 1960s that there was still a chance of taking a different path. Robert Kennedy, as Attorney General and confidant of his brother, had received real-world education about the deep state and the role of money in our government. But a few weeks after giving this speech at the University of Kansas, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. We then chose Richard Nixon as president. And 4 more years later, in 1972, we were still dropping bombs and napalm on Vietnam. Most Americans realize that we live in a dangerous world, so it's important to have a strong military and good intelligence. But perhaps it would be more effective to place more emphasis on a Peace Corps approach rather than having a military presence in 70 nations around the world as we do now. It's something for you to think about, the role of money, of special interests in determining government policy. The founders of our democracy expected the public to pay the salaries of congresspeople. The military-industrial complex, the fossil fuel industry, the pharmaceutical industry, you name it, they are not supposed to be able to bribe congresspeople. That's the fundamental, fixable political problem. So now let's turn to the second area where knowledge is required, like climate and energy. Amory Lovins is the guru for the left, for environmentalists. He was the energy advisor to Bill Clinton and Al Gore. He came to our institute in the 1980s, and what he said about energy efficiency made a lot of sense. However, he concludes that we do not need any fossil fuel, oil, gas, or coal. We do not need large hydro, nuclear power, or a carbon tax. It's no wonder that he's popular. Amory points out that Time magazine named him as one of the world's top most influential people. And Foreign Policy named him as one of the top 100 global thinkers. But I received both of those awards also. and my conclusions are opposite of his. So those awards don't seem to mean much. At least one of us must not know what we're talking about. So Lovin's plan in the 1970s, the soft energy plan was to get all of our energy from soft renewables and energy efficiency, such that by 2025, we would completely eliminate fossil fuel use in the United States. Now, in science, we must look at data. The data show that Lovins was partly right. Energy efficiency can prevent unbridled growth of energy use. However, United States energy use increased from about 75 to almost 100 on this energy scale. And it's actually larger than that because we shipped construction of products to China and other countries. So the energy is counted in China's budget, not in ours. And renewables have not grown anywhere near what Lovins imagined. We are not phasing out fossil fuels. Climate change is caused mainly by global fossil fuel CO2 emissions, which are closely related to global energy use, as you can see. Fossil fuels provide most of our energy. The energy from fossil fuels has raised the standard of living in most of the world. Renewables help out in total energy, but they do not cause fossil fuel use to go away. Most of the emissions, the growth of emissions, especially the growth of emissions, is now coming from emerging economies. We need policies that will be effective over decadal timescales, which are fair to developing countries. Fossil fuels have been enormously valuable. 1 gallon of gasoline contains the work equivalent of 400 hours of work by a healthy adult. All countries want to raise their living standards. Fossil fuels are not going to easily disappear. And we cannot blame climate change on emerging economies, even though they're now using more fossil fuels than we are. Climate change is proportional to cumulative historical emissions, which is the lower of these two bar graphs. Climate change so far is not caused by China, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the rest of the Asia Pacific. Those countries will have a bigger role in the future. That's why we need to cooperate with those countries. We all live on the same planet and face the same future. 25 years ago, I was fortunate when Jeff Sachs introduced me to Jerry Lenfest, a wonderful man who had made a lot of money in cable television. And I asked him for money to support a workshop at the East-West Center in Hawaii. Well, and he provided a lot of money, $200,000. We didn't solve all the world's problems, but it was educational. And the workshop established scientific contacts with the East that have lasted a lifetime. Another very educational thing occurred at about the same time when I decided to give a talk in which I criticized the government's energy policy. I suggested that it would be better to vote for John Kerry than George Bush. Although it was a backhanded endorsement because I said that my actual preference was John McCain, who wasn't on a ballot, but he had showed understanding of the need to address the role of money in government. And so a talk at Iowa did not get much attention. But the next year, I gave an updated version at the American Geophysical Union meeting. And this talk got a lot of media attention, which resulted in several telephone calls from the White House to NASA headquarters, as Mark Bowen describes in the book Censoring Science. Uh, NASA did succeed and prevented me from talking to the media for a while. But until I told Andy Revkin about it, and an article appeared in the New York Times. So NASA had to end the censorship, but there were consequences. I had been using the first line of the NASA mission statement to understand and protect the home planet, to justify my speaking out. Soon, this line of the mission statement was deleted, never to return. The upshot of this hullabaloo was a great opportunity for education. In the 3 years from 2006 through 2008, I was asked to give talks at universities, but also by utilities, Duke and PSE&G and others, also the fossil fuel industry. I gave a talk in London to Shell oil executives, and at a coffee break, I asked them about the images of windmills and solar panels on their website. Were they investing in those technologies? They smirched. You know, they love Amory Lovins. They're fossil fuel executives on the board of the Rocky Mountain Institute. The question is, what energy source will complement the intermittent renewable energies? Renewable energies can do a lot for us and provide a lot of our energy, but they need to be complemented by an energy source that's available 24/7 and 365. The carbon intensity of energy must be driven close to zero to solve the climate problem. Nuclear energy can make a huge contribution to that, as it did when it was introduced in France and Sweden. So nuclear power has been strongly opposed by the fossil fuel industry and by the liberal media. This I will skip the additional discussion of that. The disinformation about nuclear power includes the claim that nuclear waste is extremely dangerous. However, unlike the waste products of other energy, especially fossil fuels, which kills millions of people per year from air pollution, nuclear waste is not harming anybody. It should be placed in geologic storage because it contains valuable material, especially the energy that has not been used, because this light wire nuclear reactors that we have in the United States are only burning 1% of the energy. Advanced reactors can burn most of the rest of that energy. An advantage of nuclear power is its small environmental footprint, the smallest of all major energy sources. It allows us to leave more room on the planet for other species. It allows us, Japan and the United States have demonstrated technology to extract nuclear fuel from the ocean, and there's enough fuel there to last forever. So it's not essential to have uranium mines on land. But because of nuclear fear, there were a lot of votes in the anti-nuclear position. And Clinton was probably influenced by his energy advisor, Amory Lovins. So in his first State of the Union message, more than 30 years ago, President Clinton terminated research and development on nuclear power. Nuclear power should be one of our cheapest energies, given the amount of material that goes into building a nuclear plant and the fuel cost. But nuclear power was denied the development that renewable energy was properly given. Utilities, instead of renewable portfolio standards, should have had clean energy portfolio standards so that both nuclear technology and renewable technologies would advance and become cheaper. Okay, that's maybe a bit too much time on nuclear power, which is actually a secondary issue. The main issue is the total cost of energy to society. On the day before the presidential election of 2008, we had a workshop in Washington on energy and climate. The main conclusion is that the price of energies should include their costs to society. In December of 2008, after Barack Obama was elected, I actually this was in December of 2008. I was in London with Anik, and when she had a mild heart attack, and that gave us time. We couldn't fly for a week, so it gave me time to write a letter to President-elect Obama, and so I described the two important actions that he could take to have this carbon fee and dividend, and to support advanced nuclear power as a secondary issue. Again, I have too much discussion there, so let me go to the next one. In the letter to Obama, I called it a carbon tax and 100% dividend, but soon changed the name to carbon fee and dividend to emphasize that no money goes to the government. The fee is across the board on oil, gas, and coal collected at the source, the domestic mines and the ports of entry. And with a rising fee, business people and entrepreneurs will reduce carbon emissions faster than government regulations can ever succeed. The economic studies show that. The dividend should be 100%. If it is, if you distribute them, all of the money that you collect to the public uniformly, 70% of the people will get more in this dividend than they pay in increased energy prices. And that's it favors low-income people, so it addresses the wealth disparity, which is growing in our country and in other countries. Rich people will lose money because they have a big carbon footprint, but they can afford it. The other requirement that I mentioned in the letter was the need to support modern nuclear power, because the choice for the complementary 24/7 energy is between gas and nuclear power. And the fossil fuel industry knows that. That's why they lobbied very hard against nuclear power. And we can see exactly what is happening. Coal use in the U.S. is going down, but gas is going up to replace that. Uh, so if we choose gas, we're choosing fracking, we're choosing pipelines, we're choosing groundwater pollution, we're choosing methane release, and we're choosing dangerous climate change. Yet that's the path that we are on, thanks to the implicit cooperation uh, of the fossil fuel industry and the big green environmental organizations. Uh, okay, so I, now I've reached the end of my notes in my preparation for this talk today. So I'll have to wing this, but I wrote a op-ed for the New York Times, and it was titled "Sack Goldman Sachs, Cap and Trade," because cap and trade is a gimmick, and anybody who's really analyzed that figures it out that it's not going to be very effective. But when I went to talk to people like Obama appointed John Kerry to be his energy czar and to get some congressional action on climate. And he was very generous. I went to his office and talked to him for an hour, and he agreed, well, yeah, carbon fee and dividend would be best, but I can't get any votes for that. Well, when Congress is being paid by the fossil fuel industry, you can't get any votes for what's effective. But here, so I, to try to combat that, I wrote this op-ed to the New York Times. And what does the New York Times do? They changed the title from Sack. So Goldman Sachs was ready to make billions. They have skilled trading units who, with this cap and trade, they would make billions, and every cent comes out of the public's pocket in increased energy prices. They're not generating any wealth. But New York Times changed the title to Cap and Fade. What the devil did that mean? It was the opposite of what I was trying to say. And when they won't tell you the title of your op-ed, and they even edited it in ways that I didn't like. But at the same time that op-ed appeared, 2 articles in the same issue of the newspaper by Paul Krugman appeared. And one of them, the first sentence was, if the United States is going to have action on climate change, it will be cap and trade, period. So and he has a blog. At the same time the newspaper came out that morning, his blog came out with a long article titled "Unhelpful Hansen." And so he gave all the arguments. Oh, this fee and dividend is no different than cap and trade. They're just a little different. And one of the many responses, there are more than 500 responses, some of them by economists which agreed with my position rather than Krugman's. But one of them said Krugman is like Colonel Nicholson in the he's actually working for the enemy. He doesn't know it, but he is. He's helping out the fossil fuel industry by arguing against something that would actually address the problem. Well, eventually, several years later, late at the end of the Obama administration or the beginning of the next one, there came out a statement by 28 Nobel Prize winning economists and all the living Federal Reserve chairs, etc., and thousands of economists across the country, all of them endorsing carbon fee and dividend. They called it carbon dividends, but when you read what the description, it's exactly carbon fee and dividend. Well, and even students, more than 350 college student government presidents came out in favor of this. Well, it would be great if this had bubbled up and students understood this technical issue. But I think in reality, I know what happened behind the scenes, and that is a very dedicated person, Ted Halstead, got George Shultz and James Baker III, these stalwarts from the Reagan administration, they both were secretaries of state, to agree on the Baker-Shultz plan, which is carbon fee and dividend. And then they, with their star power, it was able to get out and get all these economists to agree, yeah, that makes sense. And they also got these college student presidents to agree to this. The students were just saying, well, you should follow the science. And if all these economists are saying this is the way you should do it, then you should do it that way. So that unfortunate, and this might have gone further because Ted Halstead was really effective in communicating and getting support and getting philanthropic support for what he was trying to do. Unfortunately, he went mountain climbing in Europe and he fell 30 meters and killed himself. So that has not been going very far. We've tried. At the end of the Obama administration, near the transition from Obama to Joe Biden, so actually there's a gap of 4 years in there, isn't there? So I'm not sure of exactly the date of this telephone call. Oh, this is a chart. Since I didn't prepare any more words, I put down some notes to remind me. Oh yeah, Virginia Tech. So in 2008, I gave a talk at Virginia Tech. The students who picked me up at the airport and the students in general were all very enthusiastic about Barack Obama, who they preferred over Hillary Clinton, who was the designated choice of the Democratic establishment. And it was because of all this enthusiasm of young people that Obama overtook Clinton and got the nomination of the Democratic Party. So you should not underestimate your power to influence politics. But then the question is, and Obama said the right words, said we had a planet in peril, and he was going to address that. And he had a great opportunity. There was a financial crisis in 2008. Congress had to pass a big bill. And that big bill could have included carbon fee and dividend. Now we get to, so that was when, then and Nick and I were in London, and I wrote this letter to Obama, and the science advisor would not deliver the letter. The science advisor, you see, Obama, he was, although, I had tears in my eyes when he was elected on election night because this was so fantastic. It looked like for climate purposes it was good, and it showed that we could elect a black person or as president of the United States. It was fantastic. But Obama didn't have the understanding, and he was somewhat of elite. He was a Harvard, and he picked a Harvard science advisor, and I couldn't get that science advisor to deliver the letter to Obama. Eventually, several years later, a large donor to the Democratic Party. If you give enough money, you can get a visit with the president. This donor was aware of my stuff because I started putting stuff on the blog and things, and he believed that was what we should do. We should have carbon-free and dividend. So he asked Obama, would he be willing to meet with me? And he said, well, he would be interested if it was about policy because he already was convinced on the science. He didn't need to hear anything more about the science. Well, that meeting never happened, even though he said he would do it. Because the science advisors said, oh, yeah, I'm telling him everything he needs to know about climate. So that didn't work during the Obama administration. Shortly before the Joe Biden administration, another wealthy person who, again, agreed we've got to address climate and this fee and dividend is a way to do it. And so, there was a ballot initiative in Washington State for a carbon tax. So it was close to what we were talking about. And it looked like it was going to lose on the ballot initiative because the social justice community was opposed to it. So this philanthropist managed to get me on the phone with Van Jones, and we tried to inform him that this carbon fee dividend is great for low income communities and for social justice, especially for urban, because the carbon footprint of urban people is much less than average. So they're all going to make money from a carbon fee and dividend. But he was so persuaded that they had the power, would have the power during the Biden administration. He said, we're going to be in charge. And that's kind of what happened, with the Biden administration. It was giving first priority to social justice, which is fine, but they should have realized that this is not, and they gave a heavy emphasis to DEI. And on the long run, I think it backfired. The public in general, it was too much, it was too far, and it was ineffective. It would have been so much better to have a policy that would actually work and benefit low-income people, address the wealth disparity problem that exists. Anyway, that didn't work. So now let's talk about scientific reticence. In 1988, I told Congress that I was 99% certain that Earth had entered a period of warming. And I had a high degree of confidence that it was a result of human-made changes of atmospheric composition. The next year, based on research of our small group of young scientists at the Goddard Institute for Space Studies, our research showed that warming would eventually pump up both extremes of the hydrologic cycle. Heat waves, droughts, and extended fire season on the one hand, but also heavier rainfall events and greater floods and stronger storms. I was surprised by the reaction of other climate scientists who didn't like my testimony. Science magazine seemed to characterize me as an angry scientist going out on a limb. Although you could read a different story between the lines in the article. One scientist said, if there were a secret ballot, most of people would say the greenhouse warming is there. And another said, what bothers us a lot is that we have a scientist telling Congress things that we are reluctant to say ourselves. In part, this may have been scientific reticence, a preference of scientists to be cautious, which is okay, but excessive reticence can be a problem because of the delayed response of the climate system. We can build up future consequences that young people may not be able to avoid. Feynman liked to point out, like to needle his fellow physicists about the fact that Millikan, in his famous oil drop experiment, had got a value for the electron charge, but it was off. And when other scientists later would get a number which didn't agree with Millikan's, they would get a number out here closer to the true value. They would just report a number a little bit different than Millikan's, moving it in the right direction, because there are always a lot of experimental parameters you can choose. And it took them many papers, and eventually they got to the right answer. But that was a case of scientific reticence. We better not be that slow with the climate problem. And here's some notes to myself. Yeah, I agreed to be part of a lawsuit against the federal government and their failure to protect the rights of young people. And my oldest grandchild was part of this. Not the first lawsuit. But the first lawsuit got to the D.C. District Court, which is the court below the Supreme Court. And so I really was trying very hard to get this paper published because it was providing the scientific basis for our lawsuit. But I had this big trouble with PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, because the editor didn't like the fact that there were normative statements in the paper, meaning and saying the scientists don't have the right to make normative statements. Well, eventually they decided that the word dangerous, it was the title of the paper was something about dangerous climate change. So he gave the paper to the anonymous editorial board member who said, I have to take out all these normative statements. And finally, he said the word dangerous was normative. So I finally just threw up my hands and withdrew the paper and finally published it in PLOS One. but by that time, the court case had been lost. Uh, then in 2016, after a subject that I had been working with my colleagues on for several years, ice melt, sea level rise, and superstorms, we concluded, the title of the paper concluded, 2 degrees Celsius global warming is highly dangerous because it means our model said that it would shut down this overturning North Atlantic circulation, and that would spur more rapid melting of the ice sheets and large sea level rise. With the shutdown occurring by the middle of the century and large sea level rise within 50 to 150 years, meter scale and multimeter sea level rise. There were 2 referees. One of them said, this was a brilliant paper. The other one was an IPCC lead author, and he was determined that this paper never be published because IPCC, by its nature, is reticent, super reticent, because they've been given this authority by the United Nations, and in any case, for whatever reasons, and their Nobel Prize, they have so much authority that they feel they can just stop anyone who disagrees with what they have said in the past. Therefore, the editor got 2 more referees, and so 3 out of the 4 referees said this is a good paper, you should publish it. But then, so they had to publish it, but it was then given to the editorial board, and they said, you can't say 2 degrees global warming is highly dangerous. You can only say it could be dangerous. Well, then it's not saying much, and that's not what our research showed, which showed that it is dangerous. So I said, well, their point seemed to be that you must prove 100% that these things are going to happen. The ocean circulation is going to shut down, sea level rise at multimeters. But I said, look at it this way. If you are going home late at night and you look down a dark street, and there have been newspaper articles about criminal activity on that street, and you see a gang of guys loitering, and one of them is slapping a blackjack, it looks like a blackjack, against his leg, and you know that there are weapons and there have been shootings in that street. Wouldn't you consider that dangerous, even though you're not 100% certain that you'll die if you go down that street? But probably you're not going to go down that street. You'll find a different way home. Take a taxi or something. And the crazy thing is that the journal said that the editor, there was the editor who was editing the paper through, was on our side. He was a very good scientist. He's a protege of Paul Crutzen. So he was on our side, and he came back and reported in great. He was very disappointed. He said, well, you have to change the title or they won't publish the paper. And you cannot include that argument about this dark street in your communication. The whole idea of these publications is these journals that have open publication procedures is that everything is in the open. The reviews are published, the responses of the writers are published, and the communication between the author and the journal is published. But they're saying when my letter to the journal is published, it cannot include this argument about the dark street. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. What, this is totally against the whole idea. That's the nature of scientific reticence that now exists. Anyway, that's let me see. So I have to say one more thing, and then I'll talk about young people and what and what do you need to do. Uh, so I think I'm already over my time. What? How much time have I used? It's 8 o'clock. So maybe I won't talk about the research that we've done in the last 4 years. The thing that stopped me from publishing Sophie's Planet is really great. And now we show that climate sensitivity, the issue that had occurred 50 years ago when President Carter asked the National Academy of Science to look at the climate problem and see if it's a problem. The issue was, how sensitive is climate when humans cause some forcing of the system? And it was hard to say. We were lucky to be able to participate in that, but the estimates were that global warming would go up between 2 degrees and 4 degrees Celsius if you doubled CO2, which is about where we are now. But we couldn't, Charney, the Academy Committee couldn't decide what is the right answer, so he took this really big range, 1.5 to 4.5 degrees. Well, what we show now is that it's near the upper end of the range, and the reason that it hasn't occurred yet is because there are two forcings. Humans are causing greenhouse gases to increase, but humans also put particles in the atmosphere, aerosols, which reflect sunlight, which alter the properties of clouds, making the clouds brighter, increases cloud formation. They're condensation nuclei for clouds. So that has partially offset the global warming from the greenhouse gases. Now we're beginning to reduce that pollution, and we're beginning to see the effect of the reduced pollution. China is reducing its emissions. Ships have reduced their sulfur content of their fuels. Therefore, in the last 10 years, global warming has accelerated. And we explained it quantitatively. Anyway, that's what's happened in these the research we've done in the last 4 years, and I will make that clear. But let's finally get to what you can do, and you have to decide. Young people have to decide what they want, what. Are we going to throw away the progress over the age of science and reason? The Enlightenment started in Europe. It was European thinkers were primarily behind that. But the realization of it was the American Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. That was the political realization, and we got we established a democratic republic with the division of power among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. A government that was aiming to be of the people, by the people, and for the people. But so we went through these phases where this was threatened by slavery and the Civil War, but we overcame that, and by the authoritarianism, the Nazism of World War II, and then things improved from the time I was born until you know, we went through this. The United States put a man on the moon, and the Berlin Wall fell. But there was a problem that was growing during those last few decades, and that was the role of money in government. And that's led to this political polarization and dysfunction today. So I think uh, Marshall Saunders, who died 2019, was a visionary who supported this citizens climate lobby, where we tried to, which was had the sole purpose of supporting carbon fee and dividend to get the role of to solve the climate problem. But we realized, as we couldn't get that to happen, that you can't solve the problem as long as Congress is able to accept money from special interests. So we decided, well, we should, after I publish Sophie's Planet, we're going to uh, try to encourage a third party which will take no money from special interests. Well, Marshall Saunders died before I finished the book. That shows how slow, the problems of my slow writing. But anyway, if I were a young person, I would be thinking about using the power of that young people have to try to get a political party that takes no money. Just by definition, it will not accept money from special interest. Uh, it would be great fun to help define the platform of such a party. And I say that a majority of Americans would vote for it if that existed. A majority, most of Americans are not in favor of the extremes of the two existing parties. I think it could work. Uh, there are, I don't know what your favorite items on the platform would be. I notice I did not include pre-K education. I think if you want to have equal opportunity, you've got to have, every family has got to have their children educated from the time that they're able to begin to learn. And that would mean pre-K education for uh, for everybody. That would be on my platform. But it's going to. I think we're in a period of chaos now. With our present government, and I think this next few years, it's possible that something good could come out of this. But if that good does not take the role of money out of our government, it's not going to solve the fundamental problems. So you've got to really think about that. When I finish my book, I'm going to start talking to universities, see if I can persuade some young people. But it's their world, I mean, as I say, I'm 84 years old. It's not my future that we're talking about. It's your future, and you have to think about these things and what you believe is important, and what you're willing to do. But it's not, and I would not be discouraged if I were you. I'd not to be depressed. I mean, think of, my parents' generation had to fight in World War II, and many of them didn't come back. And even in my generation, I was lucky. I kept opening the letter from the draft board with some trepidation, and it encouraged me to get straight A's in college because I knew that it was less likely to be drafted. So it's not all your situation you've been handed a bad hand by older generations who put you in a spot. But yeah, it's a planet that's worth saving, and it's a fight that's worth having. Um, but it's going to be up to young people, and it is asking a hell of a lot to expect young people to understand this situation when most old people don't understand it. Although most people know that Washington is a swamp of special interests, and they don't like it. That's why we throw out one party and then throw out the other one and then throw out the first one again, because we know Washington is a swamp. We've got to fix that, to fix our country and to fix the climate problem. Thank you. I think I used too much time, but I'm happy to answer questions. Any students that want to stay and talk, or anybody wants to ask questions.
So you talked about there needing to be profit incentives for real change to be made. From your experience, what do you think potential ones that will or could work can look like, and how do you think we should go about making that happen?
I did not quite understand. Could you repeat the question?
Sure. How can we make it more profitable? How can we make it more incentivizing? If if what we need is the climate consciousness, or at least the veneer of climate consciousness, in order to be profitable, um, in order to make it worth their time, really. How can we do that?
Yeah. Well, I guess the question is really, how do you start it? um, that's hard. I don't think, as I said, communication among young people they seem to be extremely good at it. Nevertheless, you do need some organization, and there are probably costs associated with that. But there's a hell of a lot of philanthropic people who know that we've got a effing mess, and they will be willing to support a any promising effort to do something about that. And we know they know that young people are being handed a bad hand. Uh, so how does it get started? It usually these things get started by a small number of people, but they have to be sufficiently good at communicating to draw in. It's like when I arrived at Columbia University in 1967, almost immediately there was these on-campus problems where Mark Rudd, a small number of people, managed to organize the students to protest against the Vietnam War, against the social injustice of this white community in this black neighborhood, and it was pretty effective. Now, and they took over buildings, Columbia University. Now, if they do that, they'll get thrown straight in jail. So you have to be a little careful about how you organize things and what you do. I'm a physicist trying to understand the climate system. And so I'm not the best person to answer that type of question. But it's the kind of thing which, yeah, it's a good question. And we've got to figure out, you've got to figure out how to go with it.
How do we keep, so if you had a cap and trade system or your dividend system, how would you keep companies and other leaders from exporting their pollution to other countries?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't talk about really interesting. I was invited by the Kissinger Institute on Climate on China and the United States to attend a meeting 12 years ago in Beijing, where and the topic, there were just two scientists from the United States invited to go. I was the climate scientist, and the subjects of the meeting were climate science and infectious disease. It turned out to be pretty prescient choice of topics. And the other scientist was Tom Frieden, the director of Center for Disease Control. And so this was like 6 years before COVID. But in any case, China, was trying to do. So this was a meeting for the think tank for the Chinese government, a meeting with the think tank for the Chinese government. China, this. Okay, so China was trying to do whatever the United States was proposing to do. They started to work very hard at that time, and they took us to these places where they're starting to work on solar panels and windmills, and they perfected both of them. They made them cheaper than anybody could, and they started churning them out for China and for sale to anybody. But we went to these different cities, and the mayors said, "Oh yeah, we're working on these renewable energies," and then they would show their CO2 emissions, and they were shooting up anyway. Their coal use was skyrocketing. So I said, "Well, what about nuclear power?" And they said, "Well, that wasn't encouraged by the United States." So I called up the chairman of the MIT Department of Nuclear Engineering Department, and Per Peterson, who's the top nuclear expert in the United States, in my opinion, and said, we better have a workshop with China. I had this experience in having a workshop at the East-West Center. And so, they said, it would be really great because we can't build anything in the United States. It's so hard. They've got regulations, so it takes 15 years to build a nuclear plant. The Democrats have tried to kill nuclear energy in the United States. So we did have a workshop in China, and U.S. and we tried to report this back to the Obama administration. They were not interested in working with China. You would need to start to build nuclear reactors in factories, so it doesn't take 15 years. So you make the scale somewhat smaller so you could do it. Anyway, so that didn't work. But the thing I was going to say about China comes in another way, in that the military-industrial complex needs a new enemy. I hit something. I guess that's kind of an interesting thing, but it's a film. I don't think you want to have 5-minute film. But all these people swinging and swaying in a 200,000 people who were saying, give us the warm glow of a wood fire, but take your poisonous nuclear power away. Well, the warm glow of a wood fire was killing 4 million people a year. Indoor air pollution was killing 4 million people a year. So unfortunately, anyway, but that's a different story. I don't know how I'm hitting something here. But still, the answer to your question about so the other thing is the military-industrial complex needs a new enemy. And it decided that's China. The point is, are we really afraid that Chinese soldiers are going to be charging up the West Coast, the beaches, onto the United States? I don't think so. But if you keep calling them an enemy and you treat them as if they're an enemy, then pretty soon they are an enemy. I wandered away from your question, which I forgot. What was the question?
How do you stop unlimited cap and trade system for a different?
Oh, so now I remember the interesting point. So at this workshop on nuclear power, I said I had previously heard a talk by the top Chinese expert on their energy policy. And I said, can't we invite him to the nuclear workshop, which was way down in Hainan Island, south of China? And he's in Beijing, of course. He flew all the way to have lunch with us on Hainan Island from Beijing and flew back later. But I talked about carbon fee and dividend. Wouldn't this make sense in China as well as in the US? Because they have a wealth disparity problem. And he said, yeah, let's write a paper on it. Well, the paper never got written because this getting the nuclear paper published in Science turned out to be very hard. There's such prejudice. But my point is that China was willing to cooperate if we were more willing. And but the way you make this global is to say we're going to have a border duty on products from countries that do not have an equivalent carbon fee. And that's an encouragement for those countries to have their own carbon fees so they can collect the money themselves rather than have us collect it at the border. So and all the economists agreed, yeah, that's the way you should do it, with a border duty. And you can make a carbon fee global. So it would work. The only problem is fossil fuel industry doesn't want it. So it has to come from the people. And unless you take money out of Washington, it just doesn't seem to happen.
Time for one more question, please.
Yeah, Doctor. As Elizabeth when talk about carbon emission, factoring star externality at the total cost, perhaps we should, with talking to our young generations, should we also factor in those costs for renewable energies? So does it take more to recycle our batteries? Or are we even cooling more? You recycle those batteries, which we proclaim to be green, than fossil fuels.
Yeah, there are issues. The question relates to the complications that occur. And when I said nuclear has the smallest environmental footprint, it's partly because of these other factors. Not only do the renewables take a big area on the planet, but what are you going to do to store the energy when you've got this winds not blowing and sun shining or not shining? So yeah, there's a lot of pollution associated with renewable energies as well as with any energy. And the long-term policy needs to be, I think, as we phase down fossil fuels, I'm assuming we can get a price on them and phase them down over decades. Then I think we should replace carbon fee and dividend with an energy use fee and dividend to encourage energy efficiency and minimum waste. We make a lot of stuff that we don't really need, would be just because we can do it. So if there's an energy cost to it, you could discourage overconsumption. Yeah, so that I might not really answering your question. Yeah, there are individual details about individual energies and energy things. Like President Trump claims that the windmills are killing birds. Well, yeah, they probably are killing some birds, but our windows are killing birds. So I don't know how significant that factor is. I think it's the fact is the fossil fuel industry gave him a lot of money at the campaign, and so now he's trying to kill their competitors, the fossil fuel competitors. That's really what's going on there. Again, it's the role of money affecting our policies when it shouldn't.